morning, or good afternoon, excuse me, and welcome to Willamette Women Democrats' second virtual program. All the guests who have come in should be muted and their video turned off. So please mute yourselves, and we will be turning off videos as people come in. That allows us to have a smoother program and not be interrupted with different people moving about. We've worked really hard to try and make everything go smoothly, but of course we're all new to this process, and so it's really important that you be patient with us, but we're very excited to be able to present these programs. Putting together a program like this does take a lot of work, and I particularly wish to thank members of our board, Vicki Monroe, Kay Bourdin, and Patricia Rovinen. Right now, it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers. Oregon's Labor Commissioner, Val Hoyle. Val and I share two things in common. We share a birthday, of Valentine's Day, and the state of Oregon's birthday, and we share red hair. I always thought the red hair went with the Valentine's Day, but I know that Val will tell you it's Irish, although I don't believe I have any Irish in me, but who knows. In May of 2018, so basically 2 years ago, Val won election as Oregon's 10th Labor Commissioner for the Bureau of Labor and Industry. So we're gonna call it BOLI the rest of the time we talk, a little shorthand. Val grew up in a proud union household in New England. She worked in the outdoor industry for 25 years, specializing in domestic and international sales. And then she moved to Eugene with her husband, Stephen, and 2 young children, based on the quality of life and the reputation of the school district. She served as a member and chairperson of the Oregon District Export Council from 2003 to 2010, and then she got involved in local politics to support public education. She was the chair of the Lane County Democrats, and then was elected to the Oregon House representing West Eugene and Junction City. That was a 28 election, and she served from 2009 to 2017. From 2012 to 15, she was the House Majority Leader. Following her service in the legislature, she worked for the University of Oregon's Wayne Morse Center for Law and Politics. She earned a Bachelor of Arts degree in political science with a concentration on international studies from Emmanuel College in Boston, Massachusetts. W2D is also thrilled to welcome to our program Carol Johnson. Carol was named Director of the Civil Rights Division of BOLI in July of 2019, where she works to defend Oregonians' civil rights in employment, housing, public accommodations, and career schools. Prior to assuming her current role, she served for 14 years as the Executive Director of the Arkansas Fair Housing Commission, which is the only state agency specifically charged with protecting civil rights of Arkansans and the sole civil rights enforcement agency in that state. She has also served on the U.S. Civil Rights Commission. She's a licensed attorney and holds a bachelor's degree from Texas Christian University and a Juris Doctor from the University of Arkansas School of Law. So welcome to both of you, and Val, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, and I think we have a slide presentation, right?
Yes, we do. So we can put that up for you in just a second.
Okay, great. So first of all, I just want to say thank you so much. I'm talking to you from my home in just outside of Springfield, Oregon. You can see beautiful rural Springfield. And I'm thrilled to be joining you. And I'm also, at this point in time, so proud to be overseeing an organization that protects workers, expands apprenticeship, works to get information to businesses. It is the labor commissioner of the state, and I'll just do a little bit of history about what this job is and what we do, and then give you a brief overview of sort of the direction I've taken in the year that I've been there, and it has been a busy year. What we're doing now, and then allow Carol Johnson to talk to you about some of the really incredible things that we're doing with our Civil Rights Division under her leadership. So for those of you who don't know, this position was created in 1903. Across the country, there were wildcat strikes happening as workers had no access to rights in the workplace and safety in the workplace, and people were dying. And so the Oregon legislature in 1903 created this position to be a liaison between business and labor, to be able to stand up and protect workers, while also working with businesses to make sure that they solved the problems before they exploded in the kind of violence that was happening across the country. O.P. Hoff in 1903 was the first labor commissioner in Oregon, and this is an elected position, and it's unique in that there are only 4 states that have an elected labor commissioner. All the rest of the states, 46 states, the labor commissioner is appointed by the governor, but the legislature specifically wanted the labor commissioner to be accountable to the people and not accountable to another elected official, so that that person could have the freedom and the authority to act on their own, and again, not at the behest of another elected official. At that time, when O.P. Hoff started as labor commissioner, he worked to protect the rights of workers, but specifically white workers, because as we well know in Oregon, we have a strong history, a sordid history of not protecting people of color. So around the 40s and the 50s is when the Bureau of Labor and Industry added civil rights protections and really worked to protect the rights of all workers, regardless of their race or their background. So what we do is we enforce the civil rights laws for the state. We enforce the wage and hour laws for the state, including prevailing wage law and setting prevailing wage. We certify the apprenticeship programs in this state. We certify apprenticeship programs, and the Department of Labor certifies apprenticeship programs. So we work with the Federal Department of Labor. And then we have a technical assistance division, and this is a part of our agency where businesses can call and ask about how to follow the law. We don't give legal advice, but for many small businesses where they're really not sure and they don't have an HR person or a lawyer on site, they can call us and say, hey, I'm not quite sure how this would apply. And so all day long, we give this advice to employers. And what I say everywhere I go is that we keep a clear firewall between our technical assistance for employers division and our enforcement division. So if somebody calls up and says, I'm not sure if I'm doing the right thing, I would rather have them do that, because what I have found is that the majority of businesses want to follow the rules, and we want to help them do that whenever possible by giving them access to information. So, my philosophy when I took office as someone who had been a union member, I was a member of Unite Here, the Hotel and Restaurant Workers Union, when I was in college in Boston, and I was a third generation union member. So my grandfather immigrated here, became a laborer. My father was a leader in the firefighters union. I was a member of Unite Here, and my son is a member of UFCW 555. So we have 4 generations. But I also worked for 25 years in the private sector, and I've had people ask me, what is the outdoor industry? I worked in the bicycle industry. So I worked in retail shops. I worked at Trek Bicycles, and again, came out here to Oregon to work in the bicycle industry and international sales. I've worked in manufacturing distribution. I've owned my own business. So I have experience both working with labor and business. And I think that makes me well suited to this job. This, out of our 5 statewide elected officials, we have the governor, the secretary of state, the treasurer, the attorney general, and the labor commissioner. This is the only position that is a nonpartisan position. So when I ran for office, it was nonpartisan, so I was able to win in May with 52% of the vote, and I was very proud of that. I won progressive liberal counties, and I won conservative counties on the message that I will support businesses who are trying to follow the rules, and I will hold those accountable who are breaking the rules, treating workers badly, because fundamentally there are no businesses who are following the rules that should have to compete with people that aren't paying their fair share, that people that again, are cutting corners. So that's the philosophy that I brought into the into the agency. And with that, I wanted to bring leadership into the agency from outside of state government. And so we did national searches for our division directors. So my wage and hour director, Sonia Ramirez, came to us from the National Building Trades, where she worked for 10 years as their legislative director. Previous to that, she worked for the AFL-CIO as their point person on the Hill lobbying for immigration reform. She's a first-generation American, and she's bilingual, bicultural, and her story is pretty amazing. You should have her here sometime. You know, her parents were undocumented farm workers, and she got to go to the Hill and actually speak for people and have representation. When she protects workers' rights, or we go out and look at farm workers' housing, she looks at it from a very different perspective. It's not from a technical perspective, but rather looking at workers as people. And I think that that's really important. My new apprenticeship director, her name is Lisa Ford. She also came to us from the National Building Trades, where for 12 and a half years, she ran their Helmets to Hard Hat program. She's a Marine Corps veteran, and she came to us where she had been working to get veterans into the building trades once they, once they had served their time in the military. She ran the program for the 11 state Southeast region. And so she's been in Oregon all of 4 weeks, all of which we've had to work from home. So it's been really interesting. And then Carol Johnson, who's overseeing our Civil Rights Division, who again, not only was she the executive director of the Fair Housing Commission in Arkansas, she started it. And so she is a leading civil rights expert and an attorney. When Brad Abakian was the labor commissioner, he was an attorney. So he had a different perspective than I did. So I felt like it was really important to have an attorney that was overseeing my civil rights division. So what I've focused on as I've taken on this job is making sure that our agency is focused on customer service as opposed to focused on the processes and procedures within our agency. And the first thing that we did was notice that everything was really paper heavy. I mean, previous to when myself and Carol came in, if you wanted your records from civil rights for your own case, and again, people come to us because they don't have the resources to pursue a private right of action in many cases. You had to pay for your own records, and we charged by the pound of paper. I don't even understand that, right? So it's really been an interesting transition as we've had people working from home, where we were able to say, we don't need to have this much paper, and we need to focus on making sure that everything we do is accessible to our end user, whether it's a worker or whether it's a business. So one of the things we did, and you can see right here, is that we changed our logo. This is Oregon Bureau of Labor and Industries. For so often, people would say BOLI, and they either had a bad impression of BOLI, right? Or they didn't know what it is, because BOLI doesn't speak to anything. But if you say Bureau of Labor and Industries, well, that's pretty clear. We're the people that look after labor and industries. So if you can, how do I move this to the next slide? Can I do that?
We'll move.
Oh, move it to the next slide. So this is our previous logo, right? Where the state of Oregon, right, is the the seal of the state of Oregon is in the O, as if the most important thing in that logo, in that word, is the of. That's not the most important thing. All right, move to the next one. So here, again, what's the most important thing? Oregon, labor, and industry. So we'll be launching a new website in a couple of weeks, and I'm really excited. I don't know if any of you have looked at our website. It's awful, right? Like, it is from a long time ago. I think Representative Gomberg said, you know, this looks like my business website. And I paid a high schooler in 1989 to design it. And I'm like, yeah. And it was also written at the level of a law school or graduate, you know, level, that someone at a law school or graduate school level could read. And that's not the people that come to our website. So we wanted to make it easier to read. Can you go to the next slide? So this is our website, which is fine. And there's information, but again, the information was put on to say, we've checked that box. And again, I'm not faulting anyone previously. The legislature gave us $250,000 so that we could upgrade our website. And that wasn't something that was done before. So again, no fault to anybody previous, but this is a typical government website where the information is there if you can dig in enough to find it. Can you go to the next slide? This is our new website. Welcome to the Bureau of Labor and Industries. How can we help you? Because that is the focus that I brought is I want to make sure that we're addressing the needs of customers who come to us. I want to make it simple. So we're making it so that you can fill out a wage claim online. And there's a lot of math that has to be done, and we've had paper forms. You're going to be able to do that online. And the calculations are done automatically. You'll be able to fill out a civil rights complaint online. If you're a worker, employer, if you have civil rights issues, apprenticeships, you can just click on that, and it's really simple and straightforward. Again, coming from a sales background, coming from a customer service background, I felt like this was one of the most important things that we could do, is make what we do accessible, because so many people don't realize all the work that we do. I mean, one thing that I found out when I came to this agency is that we have so many people that are really, really talented and passionate, and they work with us because they believe in our mission. They could be making a lot more money elsewhere, but they come here because they care about what we do. And I think the least that I can do to help them is tell that story better. You can go to the next slide. So our work, wage and hour. So if you're someone who has your wages stolen, or again, if you have a state or federally funded project and you want to know what the prevailing wage is, what wage you have to pay on on a larger project that gets paid the prevailing, or what's generally the union rate, this is the place that you would come to, right? So if you have been discriminated against by having your wages stolen, by not being paid correctly, by not being paid overtime, you would go to this division. And again, the person that is heading that has been heading up that division for the past 8 months is Sonia Ramirez, and she's just done a tremendous amount to make our work accessible and really focus, instead of making sure everybody's checking the boxes, making sure that we're focused on that end user. Okay, next slide. Apprenticeship. So again, Lisa Ford, who's been here for a whole 4 months, took over for Steve Sims, who had been the apprenticeship director for 26 years. And one of the things that Steve had done was really expanded our footprint in apprenticeships within the building and construction trades, and made sure that we really focused on diversity within our apprenticeship programs, right? Because that is critical and important. And Lisa's coming in to build on top of that. What we want to do is expand apprenticeship outside the building and construction trades. A lot of the processes that we have in our apprenticeship division are built on building and construction trades, things that we, that are part of their standards and culture, but it doesn't translate over. For instance, in building and construction trades, you need to have certain ratios, maybe one apprentice to one journeyman if you're learning how to work with electricity. It's really important that you have supervision. If you're learning how to code computers, you don't need to have those same ratios. So what we're looking to do now is expand our footprint in apprenticeship and respond to what the market needs. For instance, through COVID, we've seen that we're going to need doctors and nurses, especially ICU and ER doctors and nurses. But what we haven't been talking about is unlicensed people in the hospital. So the people that clean hospitals are really important, especially in the age of COVID. But normally you train those people in the hospital, which you can't do when we have a pandemic. So I contacted the Hospital Association, and working with them and SEIU, the Service Employee International Union, we worked together to and Lane Community College, we put together a 2.5-week training program that is online that trains people to know how to clean to a hospital level, right? It costs $7,500 to set up the program. It's $275 per person. This is something that we'll be able to transfer over as people need to have trained cleaners in their manufacturing plants, in restaurants, in other work sites. We'll be able to teach people about what it means to clean to a level that we aren't transmitting viruses. That was something quick, and previously, we wouldn't have been able to move that quickly because it didn't fit into our standards. The other thing that we did in working with the Hospital Association was set this up as an apprenticeship program, pre-apprenticeship program that built a career ladder where if you had gone into work previously in the hospital as a cleaner, then that was your job, low wage job, entry-level job. We set this up as a career ladder that ends up with a $95,000 a year job as a supervisor of environmental services. So we're setting up career ladders and opportunities, and we're also filling the needs of industries and having an opportunity for people that want to get back to work. And I think that's what we need to do now. Quite frankly, as we get this economy going, we need agencies, and we need, as an agency, we need to work with industry, we need to work with workers to get people back to work, to get our economy going, and do it in the way that's more rapid response than we have previously. So with that, if you'll turn the next slide. Technical assistance. As I said, we've got about 10 people, and all they do all day long is answer emails and calls. They do seminars about how to follow employment law. And we have a clear firewall because we want employers to call first before they make a mistake, and we'll talk them through it. Since COVID, we've been working with employers as the state is opening back up to talk to them about how do they work with the current laws that we have in the new age of COVID? And so we've been really, I think it's very hard right now for a lot of people, but I feel like with our agency, we're able to be on the front lines and help people navigate some really difficult times. So that's technical assistance. Next slide. Civil rights. So this is where I'm going to turn it over to our civil rights director and my good friend Carol Johnson. I think, she, as I said, as Veronica mentioned, she is an attorney. She's run the Fair Housing Commission. She worked for 3 different governors in Arkansas, both Republican and Democrats. She's been a prosecutor. She's, been a workers' comp defense attorney. I am very, very grateful that I get to work with someone of her caliber. And one of the things she'll be talking about is that we previously used to do investigations for HUD, for the Federal Housing and Urban Development Agency, and we stopped doing that in 2015. We'll be bringing that back, and under her leadership, I think right now, having people protected against discrimination is critical, and we're at the forefront of that. And with that, I will turn it over to my good friend Carol.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I am really excited to be here, and more so excited to be in Oregon. Grateful to be able to work with a wonderful group of folks, and Commissioner Howell. It's just been a great opportunity. I want to talk a little bit about some of the things that we're doing in our division, and obviously also talk about our highlights with housing protection. So, civil rights is something that is very near and dear to me. It's important to all of us. And I think, looking at and recognizing all of our differences and all of the diversity and how it makes our society better is extremely important. And so, in our division, we look at protections for folks at work. We look at protections for folks in their housing context, at career schools and places of public accommodation. And so we've got protections over 40 protected class basis, which is really cool. I came from the South. I lived my entire life in the South. And civil rights protections have been, a very hard fought battle, just across our country generally. And so I was grateful to come to a place where we had so many more expansions in civil rights laws and protections. In Arkansas, we didn't have employment in public accommodations. And so this was obviously something that is very important in terms of making sure our folks are able to work in an environment that does not discriminate against them based on their race or their color or their national origin or their disability or their sex or their gender or their LGBTQ status. Briefly, I want to talk just really quickly about our involvement with housing and housing protections. At some point, we had a cooperative agreement with the U.S. Department of Urban and Housing Development, HUD, to enforce housing protections in the state of Oregon. And we lost that relationship, or we stopped having that relationship with HUD. And I'm grateful to the Commissioner Hoyle, because she is working very hard to get that legislation back in place so that we can make sure that we enforce those protections that are very important to our way of life. I want to talk a little bit about kind of the things that we're seeing now in light of COVID, which has presented many, many challenges to folks, and just in Oregon, obviously, and just across the country. In terms of some housing issues that we have seen, you may know that Commissioner Hoyle released some guidance a few weeks ago regarding hotels and public accommodations. We were seeing some instances where folks were being denied access, and these were people in the homeless community who were being denied access to public accommodations with hotels and motels out of fear. And so the commissioner released some guidance, just educating folks that, it's illegal to deny access to public accommodations based on a disability. In this particular instance, it was based on, a belief, either perceived or real, that folks in the homeless community were or could be COVID positive. And so that's been an area that we've worked on with some counties and some nonprofit groups and agencies across the state, trying to ensure that we folks have the opportunity to be housed, that folks have the opportunity, especially those in vulnerable populations like the homeless population, that they're not being denied access and denied a means to quarantine to try to prevent the spread of COVID-19. Some of the other issues that we've seen in the work context in terms of discrimination and employment. We've gotten a lot of folks who have called in with issues on dealing with protected leave. Perhaps their employers are not, granting them leave to be off that they are entitled to. So I want to just talk about a little bit about some of the protected leaves. And also about the Family First Corona Response Act, which is some emergency leave that was passed. And that leave is available for workers between April the 1st and December the 31st. And it basically expands family and medical leave for specific reasons related to COVID-19. So you have emergency sick leave, which would allow a worker 2 weeks up to 80 hours at full pay because they're either quarantined or they're experiencing some COVID-19 symptoms, or they're seeking a medical diagnosis, or 2 weeks of pay at two-thirds rate of pay. If they're off to care for an individual subject to a quarantine, or to care for their child, with the daycare centers closed, or other dependents that they have. And then it also expands FMLA protection, so FMLA protection. Previously, you had to be employed for a year in order to be covered under FMLA. This allows a worker, an employee to be covered at their 30 days of work, and provides an additional 10 weeks of expanded or extended covered pay. And so we've gotten a lot of calls about that and worker safety. So one of the areas that people are very concerned about, especially with the state and other areas opening up, is, if they go into the workplace, am I going to have a safe work environment? We do enforce, although we don't enforce OSHA, which actually is the agency that is responsible for ensuring that workers have a safe working environment. We do enforce laws protecting workers against retaliation. So if, a worker felt that they, were in an unsafe working environment, so for example, the employer is not following CDC guidelines with regard to, social distancing and things that need to happen in the workplace in order for an employee to be safe. If they made a complaint and then were in some way subjected to an adverse action, either they were retaliated against by firing or whatever that may be, then they could file a complaint with our agency, and we could look at protecting their rights in that way. I will tell you that we have not missed a beat with our civil rights enforcement. I mean, we have been inundated with calls, and yes, we have been working from home, and yes, it has been very challenging. However, I am really, really proud of the work that we've been able to do. Our team was able to transition very quickly to remote work. And our investigators, our entire staff, are very committed to civil rights and very committed to making sure they help workers, they help folks who are looking for housing, they're helping people who are trying to get access to public accommodations, even amidst all of these things that we're seeing. So we have our calls are being streamed are being forwarded to our investigators. They're working from home, they're calling, we're doing lots and lots of intake. And so we're still here, we're still working, we're still getting through those calls, and we're still protecting folks' rights. Discrimination in terms of public accommodations in public places. And so I just want to briefly kind of go through places of public accommodations would be places like malls, restaurants, hotels, motels, community centers, places that folks would frequent. And the laws protect our access to those places. And so, those protections would be for folks, based on their race or color or gender or sexual orientation, national origin, marital status, age. One of the areas that we're seeing in terms of COVID-related type discrimination complaints with public accommodations is this kind of rise in discrimination against people based on national origin. We're seeing more complaints against, from folks who are of Asian descent. Some of this discrimination is around, surrounding not wanting to provide access or service to folks who are Asian or of Asian descent out of some, some bias or hate or belief that they are either COVID positive or the reason for, coronavirus and ridiculous things like that. And so we're seeing that, and it's not just here, it's in other parts of the country as well, but certainly seeing a rise in those types of things. And let me go back a little bit to a couple of things in the housing context that I actually did not mention earlier. The housing laws provide some protections. I think I mentioned earlier against disability, gender, sexual orientation. Some of the other issues surrounding gender discrimination are around hostile housing environments, and quid pro quo. Based on the studies, the National Multifamily Housing Council released a study, I think it was about 2 weeks ago, that in April, or this past April, 1/3 of the renters were unable to make their rental payments on time because of loss of income that's COVID related. And so there has been a rise in complaints regarding quid pro quo sexual harassment in housing, and landlords offering sexual favors in exchange for rent in some parts of the country. Here in Oregon, our governor has issued a moratorium on evictions, so that law enforcement, and actually the moratorium is on law enforcement to actually serve evictions and actually evict people from their homes. And so that has been a really good thing for our state. The first moratorium was issued in March, and then that was extended. And so now we have a moratorium in the state on evictions through June the 30th of this year. And then I think also Governor Brown extended that moratorium to commercial leases as well, because a lot of the businesses are suffering because of the COVID, and so that moratorium has been expanded. And then some of the other protections that are available for Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, there's a moratorium on foreclosures, and so HUD issued a foreclosure and eviction moratorium in March. And that actually, I think it will end in 90 days. But this would protect those people who have bought homes under FHA insured single family mortgages. And so they would be protected from foreclosure in those instances. So there are some protections there, and some things that will help folks who really need it to be able to remain in their housing. Some other areas that we're seeing some discrimination or really areas of discrimination type complaints or discrimination complaints. We're seeing that in a lot of communities of color, and in our communities of color, COVID is hitting those communities very hard. So you see, issues with food access and food insecurity, and additional risk of disease in these populations. And so it's really important that they are able to maintain their access, to their housing, so that they can be in a safe and secure environment. And then I want to talk a little bit about disability and what disability means and how it's defined, and some of the areas that come up in terms of our civil rights enforcement and disability. So a disability is defined in the law as a mental or any mental or physical impairment that substantially limits at least one major life activity. And the law provides protections in all of those contexts, in the housing, in employment, and in public accommodations as well. And we saw that come up where, I mentioned earlier that we had hotels and motels that were not going to allow folks that they believed were COVID positive to be housed in their establishments. And so some of the other ways that could come up in terms of civil rights enforcement are reasonable accommodations that people can request from their employers because they have a disability. They could request reasonable accommodations from their housing providers because they have a disability. And a lot of times, some issues that have been coming up in the context of COVID-19 as a reasonable accommodation request in housing might be, what if I've lost my income, or and I need and this will be in the context, and this came up in a national conversation that we had. Would it be deemed a reasonable accommodation for a housing provider to waive, say, fees past the moratorium? So say this stuff is still, going on in August, and I am a tenant who's, still not back on my feet. And so I want an accommodation in order to remain in my housing. Would the waiver of, say, I don't know, the rent that was owed, during the moratorium, could I ask for those types of things? Or would that be a reasonable accommodation? I think we're going to probably see a lot of interesting scenarios come up as we move along, as people, are starting to go back to work, and we see some of these issues. So those are, again, I mean, housing security is very important. Employment security is very important. Being able to live free from discrimination, based on your race or your national origin, based on your disability status or your LGBTQ status. These are protections that many of us, take for granted. And it's not something that you would even, think you need to have to, to fight about or, try to protect. But again, some of these issues are things that folks that we know live through every single day. And I'm glad that we're here in order to provide the enforcement protections. We did, this past year, we had about 2,000 complaints. At the end of 2019, we had 2,000 civil rights complaints come into the agency, and those cross the line from, housing, employment, public accommodations, career technical schools. The majority of our civil rights complaints that we get in are based in employment. And then the next largest number of complaints that we get in are based in housing. And then we see smaller numbers of complaints come in based on public accommodations and based on career technical schools. I think that we're probably going to see, even in this past, 6 weeks, I guess, maybe almost 7 weeks now, we've seen a great increase in the number of calls that we've gotten that were, in some way COVID related. Either it was, again, most of those calls have been based in protected leave issues. And, we've had some housing issues as well and some calls in that regard. But I suspect that we're going to see a large influx of those types of calls come into the agency. And again, I think that it's really important that, we remain vigilant in these areas, that we continue to protect the rights of others, that we ensure that people have access and they're not denied access to equal opportunity. And we've got the tools to do it. We've got a group of dedicated and mission-driven and mission-oriented staff who really care about what we're doing here. They care about the people that we serve. They care about the public that we serve, and also education, as well. I'm grateful that we've had an opportunity in some of our enforcement actions. We've had really great success with conciliating complaints and getting resolution outside of, the administrative or judicial process. Sometimes it takes, having someone to come in and look at the situation, and through the enforcement activities, we're able to get resolution. Sometimes it's just a matter of us mediating between the parties so that someone, can stay in their housing, or, and typically I think a lot of those mediation resolutions, conciliation type work, work really well in the housing context, where there's often a communication breakdown, personality conflicts, whatever, those things that happen that make a resolution between the parties without enforcement a little bit more difficult to achieve. Again, we're here, we're open, we're enforcing civil rights. We're having, lots and lots and lots of calls. We're getting through those calls as quickly as possible. I will say that the process is delayed somewhat, just because we're having to adjust from being, in our office to kind of transitioning over into the work in the remote environment. So, we're working from our homes and we're dealing with, home life as well. But I think that done a great job, and always looking to improve those things and to do more. But I'd love to hear any questions or field any questions that you all might have about the types of discrimination complaints that we get in, or our enforcement activities in light of COVID.
Oh, okay, yeah, thank you. And can we get Val back on too? So we can take some questions. We have some time. The easiest way, there's two ways to get your question in. So one is, if you're on your computer, if you move to the bottom of your screen with your cursor, there's a place where it says participants. And if you click on that, it brings up a list over, usually on the right-hand side of your computer. And then down towards the bottom, there's a place where you can raise your hand. And if you raise your hand, then I will see that. I will unmute you, and you could go ahead and ask a question. If that does not work for you, you should have a chat feature, and you can go into the chat feature and ask your question, and then we'll look for that and we will ask it on your behalf. So we are, you can go ahead and get your questions in and start raising your hands or put something in the chat right now. And I'm going to just take a quick minute to mention, usually in our regular meetings, we have an opportunity to recognize electeds that have joined us and people who are running for office, since Election Day is next Tuesday. So I do want to mention that we're thrilled to have State Representative Margaret Doherty online. Margaret is coming to the end of her term. She is not running for re-election. She's a longtime member of Willamette Women Dems. We love having her, and we're looking forward to seeing her a lot more often. But we do want to especially thank her for the outstanding job she has done on behalf of folks who live in the Tigard, Metzger, and part of Southwest Washington area. And we're just really appreciative, Margaret. Also online are Dacia Graber, who is running for Margaret's seat. So she's the Democratic candidate for House District 35. Lynette Shaw, who is a candidate for House District 24, which is part of Yamhill County and then way out Carlton, and then part of that far portion of Washington County. And thrilled to have you both running, Lynette, and online with us. And then Bridget Brooks, who's a Tualatin City Councilor, is also online with us. Margaret, did you want to say something?
I'm unmuted. I just want to actually give a shout out to Commissioner Hoyle. I'm very, very impressed with how the agency is being run, and it seems to be run the way it was intended to be at the very beginning, and that's to make sure that workers are treated fairly and that there's access to facilities and so on for employers, and I really, really appreciate that. And I am just welcome, Ms. Johnson. I'm just glad that you are in Oregon, and we're glad to have you with us.
Thank you.
Thank you so very much for all of the support that you've given me these years. I've got another 8 months to go, which means we've got about another 7 or 8 more Willamette Women Democrat meeting. But thank you all very much.
Do we have any questions? Do we have any questions for them? Go ahead, Val.
I just want to say, while we're waiting for questions, Margaret Doherty and I started serving in the legislature on the same day because we both got appointed. We got sworn in the same day. Our offices were next to each other. Our chairs were next to each other until it was determined that probably was not a good idea. So we have had a lot of fun. In our first fundraiser, when no one knew who we were, and there were, they're like, "You're two, who are you?" We did a fundraiser where we said if we raised a certain amount of money, we would do an Irish step dance. And people came, and we did it, and it was awesome. And that started a great friendship. And I just want to say, Margaret Doherty was a pleasure to work with, one of my closest friends in the legislature, and just an outstanding voice for workers, but also as a small business owner, brought that perspective to the table. And she's wickedly funny. So thanks, Margaret, for your service.
I do have a question that came in on the chat, which is, will pre-existing conditions that put people at greater risk of death for COVID be considered differently with regards to disability and accommodations?
That's Kara.
Yeah. So do you mean in terms of accommodations in the workplace or accommodations in, so let me take a stab at it and hopefully I'll answer the question. So, I mean, a disability, you know, is a disability, right? That law, that definition is established in law. So we're not, disabilities any differently, but you know, those elements that I said, you know, mental or physical impairment that substantially limits at least one major life activity, that's the legal definition of it. So if whatever the illness is, or you know, if it meets that definition, then it's going to be a disability under the law, and then those disabilities are going to be treated in the same way. So I don't know if that answers the question. I'm happy to take a follow.
And I think one of the things I can speak to as we're opening things up, and the governor announced which counties were eligible for phase 1 opening. Lane County is one. I don't believe the metro area is one because you have a higher amount of cases. But one of the things that we've heard over and over again when people are applying for Oregon Family Leave or FEMLA, even under the CARES Act, if you are vulnerable, say you're over 60, or you have asthma, or you have a pre-existing condition and you're concerned about going back to work and you can't go back to work, right now there are not those protections. We did expand the Oregon Family Leave to apply to people that need to stay home. You will have your job protected, not paid, but protected for 12 weeks if you have to stay home with a child that is not in school. But we don't have the authority to expand the definitions of a serious illness. So with OFLA or family leave, you can stay home if you yourself have a serious illness or if a family member does. So if you have COVID, you can stay home and your job will be protected. If you are vulnerable to COVID, at this point, the way the law is written, you cannot. But we do have, you know, and we have been, I don't oversee the employment department, I don't oversee OSHA, but we have been working with people to help them get access to unemployment so that they can stay home and stay safe. So I will say, if you have someone that has had difficulty getting through to unemployment, to the employment department, you know, have them contact my office and we'll help navigate that, which is like if you have a complicated case, not just I'm waiting for this and I don't know what's happening, you know, we've been able to help people get through. But fundamentally, when we open up and people are going back to work, we have to think about what does it mean if you're a vulnerable individual, because we're going to be living with this for at least the next year. So I think we have to normalize what protections are. And I think that I would encourage the legislature to clarify what the rules are for people to stay home, because those of us who are healthier and who don't have underlying conditions, we're the ones that should be going out working, and those who don't, we want to make sure to protect. So I, again, encourage my legislators and those who are going to be in the legislature to address that. Hopefully we'll address that in a special session.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? I don't see anything right now. Okay. Well,
Veronica?
Yes.
A gentleman named John Lamont texted through the chat, but didn't ask a question yet. I don't, should I unmute?
Sure, John.
Hold on, let me find him, just a second. Okay, I have,
Yeah.
Okay, there we go.
Hi, John.
Okay, I'll finish by asking it. Commissioner Hoyle, I think I know the answer, but is your agency or the Oregon Employment Department the one that would go to for statistics and how many people are out of work now And then the categories, is it service and retail? and
That would
restaurant?
be the employment department.
That's what I thought. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you both. You can hang on and just hear my last few little announcements that I have. I do want to remind everybody that our primary is on May 19th. If ballots have not already been mailed, taking advantage of your free postage this election season, then you want to drop it off at an official ballot drop site, which is usually located near your city hall or your library, but you can go online and double check that. Most of them have not moved unless your previous ballot drop site was inside a building. I know in some places ballot boxes were inside libraries, for example, or inside city halls. Where I live, they're outside, so it's not an issue. So if they were inside, they did move, and you want to double check that. Your ballot has to be in the box no later than 8 p.m. on Tuesday. But again, it is too late to mail them now. Willamette Women Dems did make some endorsements on ballot measures and on nonpartisan candidates, including county commissioners in Clackamas County and Washington County and a metro seat. So I encourage you to go to our website and check that out. There's information there. I hope all of you will take a moment and be grateful for the progressive actions of our election clerks, former Secretary of State Phil Kiesling, our legislature, and Oregon voters. We have automatic voter registration, we have vote by mail, and now we have prepaid postage. And this is just a wonderful thing when we can all vote from home and don't have to risk our health, just as people did in Wisconsin to vote. So please appreciate our privilege and get your ballot, vote, send a note to all of your friends, and please encourage them to go forward and vote. We do have somebody online, Elizabeth Federici. If you're still there, she wanted to say a few things about the census. So, oops, I just lost her.
No, she's unmuted now.
Okay, go ahead, Elizabeth.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, great. Thank you so much for giving me a couple seconds. Yeah, I am a recruiter for the 2020 census. Hopefully everybody has already filled out their census. I know that Clackamas County for sure is doing really, really well. But we're still hiring, and we want to make sure that everybody knows that and sends that out amongst their communities where people may be looking for work. It's a really flexible schedule. Things are still kind of being worked out, but it's $18 an hour and paid mileage, weekly pay, does not affect SNAP or TAMF. So folks have to apply online, period, which is at www.2020census.gov/jobs. And I can put that in the chat. So if you know anybody, you only have to be 18. So high school seniors as well, who now need more things to do possibly this summer, please spread the word. We would really appreciate it.
Thank you, Elizabeth. So this is our last scheduled meeting of the season. We will be in touch with you over the summer, and we look forward to seeing you in the fall. Per the governor's current directive, we expect our September meeting for sure to be via Zoom. And please watch for our renewal letter with an announcement of our September speaker. It's somebody very special. So we're sure that you're going to want to join us in September. Meanwhile, thank you all very much. Stay safe, stay healthy, and enjoy in your backyards or your walks in your neighborhood or whatever with our lovely weather when it's not deciding to rain. Thank you all very much and have a good evening.